Hello everyone, thank you for coming back to listen to the final reading of the Gerald Shea Memorandum. Today we'll be covering sections 10 through 12. Just a bit of a background, if this is your first time into these videos, please go to my channel and click on the playlist for the reading of the Gerald Shea Memorandum and start on the first video. There's a link provided where you can follow along in the reading of the memorandum yourself in your spare time or during our videos. So yeah, just a little bit of a background as always into the memorandum. The Gerald Shea Memorandum was written and published in September of 2004, about 2 months after the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, also known as the 9/11 Commission, released their 9/11 Commission report. That was in July of 2004. The Gerald Shea Memorandum has preliminary conclusions that lead up to, I would say, 3 of the following main points. One would be that we know that there was an Israeli group of art students that were going around to DEA sites and supposedly spying on these Drug Enforcement Agency officers, personnel, and sites in general, which means that they were spying upon United States territory. We understand that Israeli DEA groups were also spying on the radical Islamic networks in the from the Middle East, from Al-Qaeda in the United States, and based on that information, it possibly have led them to gathering intelligence as well as following the future 9/11 hijackers in the United States. With that, we understand that the principal operations of the DEA groups the Israeli DEA groups were located in very close locations to where the hijackers were also located. For example, Hollywood, Florida, which was a definitely central training ground for terrorists such as Mohammed Atta. That's where there's a whole documentary about Mohammed Atta's operations I can't remember the name of the documentary, but I can pull it up and I guess I can reference it possibly in the comments. But yeah, so the principal basically operations of these hijackers were being followed very closely by the Israeli DEA groups, given their proximity in living areas to the hijackers as well. The places of residence, like I said, very close to the operations of the 9/11 hijackers. We understand that other areas such as Hudson, New Jersey, in California, other areas like Texas also were in close proximity to the 9/11 hijackers and also the Israeli DEA group's operations. So also many of the people who were questioned by the DEA, for example, or the FBI, such as Dominic Suter, fled to Israel from the U.S. So he's still on FBI suspect, or well, he was put on the FBI suspect list in May of 2002. And as we know of, he has not been able to comment on this information because he's in Israel, and I would assume or speculate that he's not going to be coming to the United States to comment on that anytime in the future. So anyways, let's continue with section 10. That's just a little bit of a background on the report or the memorandum. So why the Israeli groups? It is not necessary at this early stage of inquiry into these events to speculate on the original rationale for the U.S. activities of the 2 Israeli groups. A study of that question will best be undertaken in the course of the public inquiry, but a few thoughts may lend some perspective to the question. It may be that originally the Israeli DEA groups did little more than sell art, though illegally and in violation of their visas. Once the need or usefulness of keeping Arab groups under surveillance in the United States became apparent to the Israeli government, it may have viewed these art salesmen and their vans as ideal groups and vehicles into which to insert sophisticated agents with telecommunications, wiretapping, or electronic eavesdropping equipment and intelligence expertise. The vans in the operation of both the Israeli groups were able to move about in neighborhoods without raising undue concern. The art students in the Israeli DEA groups were using their vans as sometimes door-to-door salesmen. The personnel of Urban Moving Systems, the Mossad Front, were ostensibly driving about northeastern New Jersey towns in their vans to help people move, a familiar suburban sight. With ample room for personnel and electronic equipment, The vans were ideal vehicles for electronic eavesdropping. The extent to which Nice Systems, the Israeli wiretapping company for which Tomer Ben-Dor worked, the Israeli with the reference to DEA groups in his computer files, will be a matter for the public inquiry. Nice Systems was ideally suited to provide equipment and expertise to the Israeli New Jersey group because its U.S. headquarters were located in Rutherford, New Jersey, near the center of the group's operations. The future hijackers were frequent users of landlines and cell telephones and thus were ideal subjects for electronics surveillance. Midar regularly telephoned a terrorist facility in the Middle East from the United States. Both Midar and Hazmi were constantly on their cell phones. Mohammed Atta made calls to Madrid from Coral Springs and used his cell phone to call lodging establishments in Florida. Ramzi bin al-Shib, a plot leader based in Hamburg, frequently called Atta, Shehi, and Musawi from Hamburg. Jara made hundreds of phone calls from Florida, and Hanjor, Hazmi, and other hijackers made 75 calls in 2 days to locate apartments, flight schools, and car rental agencies for the New Jersey hijackers of the Pentagon plane. As to the Israeli DEA group's surveillance of the DEA, it is difficult, if not impossible, to learn from the public record at this time the precise nature of the information they were seeking from that agency. The DEA itself was not sure then, and it may not know to this day. The DEA had its own concerns about the Israeli DEA groups relating to previous drug investigations as noted above. Perhaps these concerns were well-founded. Perhaps the Israelis were using these units in part as training ground on our soil for future agents or were interested in learning the DEA's methods for tracking drug traffickers and their money, a potential source of funding for terrorist groups. But in all likelihood, the selling of art, and though far riskier, the DEA spying, were covers for their more important work of keeping Arab groups under surveillance in the United States. This activity appears ultimately to have led the Israeli groups to the future hijackers, and forced upon them unwelcome decisions as to how much and when they should tell the United States of what they had learned. Done section 10, let's go to section 11. The CIA's role and responsibilities. Finally, it is possible that the CIA was aware that the two Israeli groups were tracking suspected Arab groups on our soil, but remained unaware until after September 11th that they had come across the future hijackers. There is presently little evidence of the CIA's possible knowledge of the Israeli group's activities beyond the sheer scope and magnitude of the Israeli group's operation in the U.S. The CIA's general unwillingness to share information with the FBI, as outlined in the final commission's final report, and perhaps the brazenness of the Israeli New Jersey group on September 11th. The CIA's clumsy reconstruction of the miraculous work of John, Mary, Jane, and Alice, which appears designed to point away from the Israeli warnings, also raises legitimate questions. The CIA was prohibited by law from engaging in field intelligence operations inside the United States. Side note on that question, or that statement, we understand that the declaration of Donald C. Canestrino basically was an investigation into the possible involvement of Saudi Arabian government as well as the CIA into the events leading up to the 9/11 attacks. Basically, it was a review and information on materials from Omar al-Bayoumi, a Saudi intelligence officer who was suspected to be one, and his contact with the 9/11 hijackers in California, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Midar. Anyways, that's just a side note. So, with that information being released, this present day, we understand that the CIA did run an illegal operation on our soil with a foreign intelligence service. So, very interesting. That should just be information enough to have another commission on the terrorist attacks. So this Gerald Shea Memorandum and the Canestrino Declaration, two documents that would provide enough information for further investigation. But yeah, once again, the CIA was prohibited by law from engaging in field intelligence operations inside the United States. They may have been reluctant to cooperate with the FBI because of the burdensome constraints of constitutional protections benefiting potential defendants. They may have also regarded the Israelis as unusually effective because of their familiarity with the Arab culture and their common understanding of the Arabic language. A leading Israeli newspaper, Yedioth Ahronoth, reported in the fall of 2002 that prior to September 11th attacks, when members of the Israeli DEA groups were being detained or arrested across the United States, the CIA actively promoted their expulsion. The implication in that article was that the CIA was simply being careless, not trying to spirit the Israelis safely out of the country, but at this point we cannot be certain. The CIA may have been eager to protect the surveillance activities of the Israeli groups as a whole in an operation that ultimately failed to protect us. Any delegation on the part of the CIA or its responsibilities abroad to foreign agents in the U.S. would, of course, have been unlawful. It would also have rendered our country particularly vulnerable because, as suggested above, the interests of the Israeli government and its agents are not necessarily consonant with our own. The CIA also failed to press for the continued detention of the members of the Israeli New Jersey groups after their arrest on September 11th. After 3 months, the men were released and returned to Israel, even though their names had appeared in our own counterintelligence database, and at least 2 of them were suspected Mossad agents, and their leader, Dominic Suter, had fled to Israel on or about September 14th, only to be placed on the May 2002 FBI suspect list a few months later. The CIA is mentioned but once in the DEA report, in connection with the Israeli DEA group's effort to penetrate the DEA's Southwest Laboratory near San Diego, where Midhar and Hazmi were living. What role the CIA then played does not appear. It is clear that the DEA report was itself inspired by the DEA's own bewilderment by the very existence of the Israeli DEA groups, by the scope of their operations throughout much of our country, by their overwhelming numbers, and by their expertise. The forward article cited above states that the operation of the Israeli groups heightened tensions between Washington and Israel, not because of the operation's targets, but because Israel reportedly violated a secret gentleman's agreement between the 2 countries under which espionage on each other's soil is to be coordinated in advance. The real question today, however, appears to be whether the gentleman's agreement did indeed prevail here, and because we lacked adequate warning from our surrogates who were keeping the Arabs under surveillance, helped bring us to disaster. That's a very interesting question, because that implies that the CIA knowingly or knew that this intelligence gathering operation was occurring on our soil, let alone not any intelligence gathering operation, but the largest intelligence gathering operation on the United States soil. The tragedy of the DEA report becomes evident only after sifting through all the twists and turns of its raw data, often dull, sometimes disquieting, and reading for one last time the struggle of its authors to find a rational explanation in the introductory paragraphs. Today, in retrospect, the DEA report written in June of 2001 seems in effect a cry for help. The public inquiry into these events must include an examination into whether the CIA may have been aware of, or promoted, or condoned the surveillance by the Israeli groups of suspected Arab groups in the U.S. Detailed summary. This is the final section, section 12. Set forth below is a detailed summary of the tentative conclusions reached in this memorandum, which amply illustrate the urgent need for a public inquiry into the activities of the Israeli DEA groups and the Israeli New Jersey groups. The inquiry must include, without limitation, the examination of members of the Israeli groups and related persons, officials of the Israeli government, and certain of its agencies, including Mossad, FBI suspects, agents of the DEA, the INS, and the FBI. Certain local law enforcement officials, agents of the CIA in camera to the extent required, other intelligence sources cited by the public press to the extent possible, the boxes of documents and computer hard drives referred to on page 29, seized by the FBI from the Israeli New Jersey group, and all the other relevant documents, reports, communiques, and information. The Israeli DEA groups were spying on the Drug Enforcement Agency and thus upon the United States. The DEA itself has concluded that they were probably engaged in organized intelligence gathering on our soil. A highly regarded American journal knowledgeable about Israeli affairs has concluded that based on its own sources that the Israeli DEA groups were spying on radical Islamic networks suspects of links to the Middle East terrorism, and based on the representation of a former American intelligence official regularly briefed on these matters by law enforcement officials, that 1. At least 2 members of the Israeli New Jersey groups were Mossad operatives, 2. Urban Moving Systems, the company used by the Israeli New Jersey groups, was a front for Mossad and its operatives, and 3. The Israeli New Jersey group was spying on local Arabs. The intelligence sources of a substantial American television network reported that the Israeli DEA groups may have gathered information about the September 11th attacks in advance, and not shared it with the United States. One investigator said that the evidence linking the Israeli DEA groups to such intelligence gathering was classified and cannot be disclosed. The Israeli DEA groups are comprised of 125 or more Israelis operating on our soil. Their leaders and apparent associates included military commanders and experts with military backgrounds in intelligence, electronic intercepts, and telecommunications. The wiretapping and intelligence expertise of members of both Israeli groups and the use of vans in local neighborhoods where the future hijackers were planning the attacks and the extensive use by the hijackers of cell phones and landlines made the Israeli groups ideally suited to gather information regarding the hijackers' plans. The principal operations of the Israeli DEA groups were located in and around Hollywood, Florida, the central training and staging ground for the hijacking of the North and South Tower planes and the Pennsylvania plane. The addresses and places of residence of the members of the Israeli DEA groups in Hollywood itself were within hundreds of yards of those of the future hijackers. The operation of both the Israeli New Jersey group and the hijackers of the Pentagon plane were centered in Hudson and Bergen counties in New Jersey, with a common radius of about 6 miles. All 5 celebrating members of the Israeli New Jersey group arrested on September 11th, were aware when the North Tower plane struck the World Trade Center based on their immediate reaction to the attack, also known as the Danzig Israelis, who were caught. I always forget the name of the woman. I think her first name is Maria, but who were caught celebrating on top of their van in the Dork Towers. That's basically where that's coming from. All 5 celebrating members of the Israeli New Jersey group arrested on September 11th were aware when the North Tower plane struck the World Trade Center based on their immediate reaction to the attack and the information said to be contained in their van that the attack had been planned and carried out by Arab terrorists. After being questioned by the FBI on September 11th, the leader of the Israeli New Jersey group immediately fled to the United States for Israel. His name and aliases appear along with those of the hijackers and other FBI suspects on the May 2002 FBI suspect list. Israeli intelligence officials have reported that 2 senior officials of Mossad warned the United States in August of 2001 that as many as 200 terrorists on American soil were planning an imminent large-scale attack on high-visibility targets on the American mainland. One press report states that in August, Mossad provided the CIA with the names of the future hijackers Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. The CIA's explanation of how Mihdhar and Hazmi's names were placed on the watch list through spontaneous efforts of CIA and FBI agents is not only difficult to follow, but, as the sole reason for the watch listing, hardly credible. Mossad's own information appears to have come from its sources inside the United States. All the facts and circumstances set forth in this memorandum appear to show that Mossad's 2 likely sources of information were the Israeli DEA groups, comparable in number to that of the Arab suspects, and who appear to have tracked the future hijackers in their central places of operation in other states, and B, the Israeli New Jersey groups operating through their Mossad front in another principal locus of operations of the future hijackers, 2 of whom were Mossad agents, and 5 of whom appeared immediately aware of the origin of the attacks on September 11th. While little direct evidence supports the contention that the CIA was aware of or condoned the Israeli groups tracking the Arab terrorist groups in the United States prior to September 11th, the CIA is pressing for the expulsion of members of the Israeli DEA groups when they were detained before September 11th, their failure to cooperate with the FBI, their circuitous explanation of how the 2 above hijackers were placed on the watch list, and other relevant considerations require that the issue be taken up as part of the public inquiry into the painful events. And that is the final section of the Gerald Shea Memorandum. Thank you for listening to my recording, and I hope to see you back on my channel in the future. Thank you.